why was Missouri, Kansas State kind of that leadoff game, right? And we prefaced it, Trey, with the idea that, well, this week when there aren't any ranked matchups, you kind of have to go by feel, right? And we picked games that we felt were most interesting to us, that would have our attention come Saturday morning. And Kansas State entered Columbia, Missouri as 5.5-point favorites. We all questioned, hey, does Missouri actually have the goods to back it up? Can they upset Kansas State, a team that they haven't beaten since 2010 at home? What are they going to get from Brady Cook, who actually got booed in the early part of that game? Eli Drinkowitz addressed that in his post-game press conference. But 30-27 and a new SEC record. Harrison Mevis kicks a 61-yarder to walk it off for the Tigers. Missouri should be undefeated going into their week 6 matchup against LSU. They looked really, really good at home against a talented Kansas State team.
Yeah, they've proved what we were concerned they didn't have, right? They've had the talent. They've had Luther Burden on the field for 2 years now, but this is really his first big breakout game on the national stage. And he single-handedly at times took over that game. He was the playmaker on the offensive side of the ball that they desperately needed to differentiate themselves from K-State. But first of all, just a fantastic game, fantastic college football game, fantastic rivalry game. The fans were, really into it, even if they were, channeling that energy in a negative way at the beginning of the game for Oak Field. But just a fantastic college football game. And I am really impressed with Missouri. It seems like finally using the playmakers that they've desperately recruited and desperately put on the field. So the offensive outburst was really good. This is not what we expected, especially coming out of the game against Middle Tennessee State last week, looking a little lackluster. In Kansas State, it wasn't that they were bad on the offensive side of the ball. They started a little slow. They got a little sluggish in the middle, and they, traded blows with Missouri, back and forth. It seemed like at the end they were okay with playing for overtime, and that really came back and bit them. And you thought they were going to get away with it when Eli Drinkowitz almost grossly mismanages the clock, and he got bailed out by his kicker, Harrison Mevis, at the end of the game. He got bailed out when he nailed that 61-yarder because that delay of game penalty, that, just whole sequence at the end was, a fireable offense in some. I saw Dan Keegan, our colleague at the transfer portal, said today was either going to be, full of celebration for Missouri, or they're already going to be starting to talk about head coaching candidates for next year. So I guess we can punt it down the road, but you almost saw exactly what they were talking about there at the end. But credit to Missouri. They got it done. They win the rivalry game. It's a big, big upset. And Kansas State now has to find some more answers before Big 12 play starts.
This almost felt like, in some ways, it felt like Kansas State was losing to a good team and a team that, absolutely belonged in that competition. And then there are elements like that final drive where, again, it's like, gosh, Kansas State drops a game every single year that they have no business dropping, right? And listen, I truly think Eli Drinkowitz got out-coached in this game. They had some explosive plays. Will Howard was playing banged up, and that Kansas State offense in the rain lacked a little bit of the spark that I think we're used to seeing from the Wildcats, at least when Will Howard is under center. But yeah, that last drive just felt like one miracle after another from Missouri. And then the fact that they're able to hit a 61-yard field goal after, Trey, you mentioned that delay a game penalty. I mean, Missouri Twitter was going berserk. And Garrett,
rightfully so.
Yeah.
Right.
That sequence was disgusting because Missouri did not have a timeout, and yet there was no urgency from the Tiger players getting up to the line of scrimmage to snap that ball.
Yeah, and I mean, in a game like this, it really comes down to the little things, right? When you look at the stats, I'll bring the stats up again. But when you look at all the stats, it looks like pretty much an even right across the board, right? Total yards is pretty even. You look at the turnovers, it was 1-0, right? There's that. I mean, Missouri not particularly good on third down, but yeah, it comes down to the little things, and the little things at the end of the game, those things matter. And so, little things like clock management, little things like making sure you got the right guys on the field, the play call, stuff like that, that's going to end up mattering and obviously almost cost them. They get to talk about the longest field goal now, and that's kind of fun. But yeah, at this point, you're just happy to get out of there with the win. But you got to take your hats off to them. They played a heck of a game. Throwing up a couple more stats right here. you look at some of these stats across the board. I was really impressed. Luther Burden, with the coming out party in his first, I think, big, game that he's really being seen in as their number one guy. 7 receptions, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns, had that massive one over the top at the very beginning of the game to kind of bust open the scoring and set the tone. So really impressed with that, really impressed with Missouri and hopefully seeing what they can do going forward. And, you mentioned it earlier, how Kansas State seems to lose one of these games early all the time. Well, last year they lost to Tulane, and they ended up going and winning the Cotton Bowl.
Yep.
So we'll see what Missouri does. We all think that Kansas State's a pretty good team. I'm not going to pick and win the Cotton Bowl today, but they lose to a good team at the beginning of the year. I don't think it's going to come back and hurt them too much. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I'm really, really curious to see with Mizzou where they go from here, and if they can build on this in an SEC that we'll talk about later. Maybe not as convincing as it's been in previous years.
Yeah, no doubt about that. A shout out to Missouri's defense as well. 3 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 6 passes defended. I mentioned Howard was not healthy in this game, but still, Missouri's defense played well when they needed to.
Gracious, how about